one thing I'd like to emphasise, I know we've covered it before, but one of the biggest challenges we've got in terms of transitioning to a new model is that it's rewarding different people. I'd say the current system, the current model of work rewards the bureaucratic classes, the senior management team, the directors, etc.
This is happening in our wider economy as well, isn't it?
This happens all around. The houses around here will probably be full of managers, and directors, and all sorts of intermediaries. So our world is defined by these intermediaries. Now, what our model does is turn that on its head. It doesn't have intermediaries in it. It just has people deploying their capital at risk and people adding value. There is no room for intermediaries because it's just robbing from these two people.
I think a good way to really understand intermediaries is to talk about what you did with the farm.
Oh, yes.
Because with farms, you have somebody who's milking the cow or whatever, and then there's a load of intermediaries that the milk all goes and it goes all the way eventually to the supermarket, who are also an intermediary, I suppose. Mm-hmm. And finally the customer buys the milk at a vastly higher price. Yeah. And the farmer's pretty much going bust. And then the customer's paying a whole load of money and the supermarket's just getting rich in the middle. Not really adding much value, although some, because they do, display everything neatly and aggregate it all so I can get it all in one place, I suppose.
Well, and the farmer can supply a tanker of milk.
But I don't want a tanker of milk.
You don't want, but the supermarket will take it.
Yes. So that's some value that the supermarket adds.
Yeah, and that's why it's so tempting to the farmer.
Yeah. But your model, and you actually did this with a farm, was for the farmer to actually go straight to the customer with local produce.
Yes.
Partly that.
Yes.
But also the farmer does the selling and the growing of the plants.
Yeah. So again, we divided into teams on the farm. Yep. So it was a much more high intensity eco farm, and they had quite a lot of staff on it. So it's a little bit more like market farming. But they were run as a hierarchy, and it was quite dysfunctional. But most importantly, it lost money. And the farmer and the staff all had, ideals in their head which were grander than what they were achieving. And somehow they were losing it in the logistics and the organisation and the irresponsibility that in tiny places which was occurring. So like our business, the farm needed 1,000 improvements, tiny improvements.
Yeah.
And you couldn't go in there and sweep clean and say, I've got this. We need the Gantt chart, that's what we need. This will be the magic bullet that solves everything. It was 1,000 things that needed to improve. And really that had to come from individuals saying, I could do this better, but I've never been told to.
Yeah, they would probably resist every one of those 1,000 as well.
Yeah, so you had to get it to the point where you could make a little tiny business out of each of the individuals or pair of individuals, so they could work together, so they could cover each other when they were sick, and they knew then over the arch of the seasons what needed to be done.
So each pair of people would grow various crops spread through the year, so they've always got something to sell, and then they would actually go out and sell it to the public on a market stall or take a trolley round the road.
Yeah, they did veg boxes, so that was one constant. So they had a packing house they could supply to.
Yeah.
And anything in excess of that, they would sell in local markets to local shops, to restaurants as well. So they had several outlets.
And they did their own finance and had their own profit and loss for the year.
Yes. So we divided all the costs of the whole farm across everybody, depending on how much real estate they were using and how much cost they were incurring. And it's great when you first of all you just take all the costs and you divide it evenly over everybody. Okay, and then you let the arguments, occur, because somebody says, "Well, we don't have electricity costs like the pack house."
No.
And then the pack house would say, "Well, we don't have the water costs that you have on irrigation." Yeah. So eventually, between them, they end up saying, "Well, I'll pay 80% of that bill, but you have to pay 80%."
But if I'm the carrot man, a noun rather than verb, rather than packing, I'm
Correct.
the carrot man. I have to have a certain amount of water.
Yeah.
For the irrigation, a certain amount of electricity for packing. So I pay the bits of those. And I suppose, do I have my own tractor, or do I pay for a share of the tractor? Well, I suppose it doesn't
That's your
matter.
choice.
Yeah. Now, generally, what they do is they pay somebody to do the tractor driving.
Right, because that's a specialist skill.
An external. It was actually an external consultant.
A lot of these.
An external labour.
A lot of farms use external labour, contract labour to do certain things.
Right.
So if you only need a tractor for doing certain things 3 times a year, it's easier to get somebody in who's got a tractor.
Okay, so that's just a cost they pay. And then they've got their P&L.
Each area.
What happened when you did that? I mean, firstly, there must have been loads of resistance because people were probably frightened of... Well, did some people say, this is great, I reckon I could do really well doing this?
Some people said that. A lot of people found it a stretch to suddenly be dealing with money. Although they were dealing with money at home.
Yes.
The farmer had been acting like their dad for a long time. It was his operational mode. It was like a family, a team. And it was a very interesting group of agricultural workers because it was this organic farm. It was populated with smart people.
It was very smart people
who were being used at a fraction of their capability because they were in there for more ethical reasons than they were just simply as a local job.
Yeah.
So they were capable. So you could switch a computer on and they'd be happy to use it because they're well-educated people.
But again, if I can add something there, the challenge was to integrate the different. The number of them were specialists in their area, and that was, their focus was on their specialisation. I grow asparagus. I'm doing cabbages, and they were called growers.
But that would be okay in your model because
that was the challenge. The challenge was
don't have to do carrots as well, do they?
Well, yes. But they could do carrots, and this is their choice, of course. But when we started to say yes, but it has to be more than just growing, and it was some logistics, for instance. So they had to pack it, and they had to pack the carrots and give it to the packing house in exchange for cash.
Yes,
because that was the extent of their world. In their little virtual business, the extent of it was selling to the packing house or selling to the restaurant.
Was the packing house an internal department?
It was an internal department.
Okay, but we made them a customer.
That's right.
You could have taken that out as well and said you've got to actually go out and sell it.
Well, we wanted to do that. But I think there was, at that stage, that was a nibble too far. Yeah. Okay. That was something we wanted to achieve, but at that stage, that wasn't going to happen.
So the asparagus expert, all you're asking them to do is do a bit of packing and keep an eye on the money.
Well, it was, hold on a minute, there is a problem.
And the sounds doable.
It is, from an engineering point of view, but the problem is in farming is it's quite a risky business. So asparagus can be down, but carrots can be up because of the season.
Right, and weather.
Yeah.
Good and bad year for asparagus.
That's right. But it's not often that everything is rubbish. And so the problem for the asparagus man was they were taking on the whole risk of the crop. Whereas the farmer himself was spreading his risks across all the crops.
Brilliant. How do you get around that?
So you had to get them to do more than one crop.
Take on a wider mix of produce. But it was in their best interest anyway.
But it was something that was a bit of a leap for them.
Because you can't have a group bonus or something, can you? Because then the incentive's gone.
Yeah. Also, they did turn to the farmer a lot because of the risk that was involved. So ultimately, it was his experience and his knowledge, which was going to help them decide when was the time to plant, when was the time to harvest, when was the time to tend.
But could you have a slightly bigger group? Could you have an asparagus man and a carrot woman in the same group working together, growing both?
Yeah.
But if you make it like 3 or 4 people, you're going to have the skills there rather than the asparagus person has to learn about carrots.
Yeah. In reality, initially they wanted to work in groups more than they wanted to work individually and learn more skills. So that's how we could spread the risk.
And if somebody's not carrying their weight, then the others are going to probably kick them
out.
So it should be self-regulating.
Yeah.
Well, they have to decide between themselves how to divvy up the money that comes in.
Yeah.
So they have to pay their bills. They have to, but then what's left over, they've got to divvy up.
So there could be a bigger bonus to the specialist expert, or the one who's worked really hard,
or the one who's not been the expert and actually integrated it all together.
Yeah,
maybe they earn the biggest bonus.
But there's also that thing that they wanted to see that in a down year for asparagus, the asparagus man didn't just lose his job because of things out of his control.
Yeah.
So they wanted to make sure that it was going to be supportive of those people who got into difficulties, because the carrot man did really well this year. He's taken a bonus home and everything's great for him and the farmer.
Did 10% go into a sort of pot that keeps everybody going just in case or something?
And you'd see this cross-fertilisation. And the nice thing was, because of the veg boxes, they had a weekly income.
Yeah.
It wasn't just one big delivery once a year to the Tesco's.
Yeah.
So you had lots of nibbles at the same problem. The issue really was the fact that if you missed watering the broccoli at one particular time in a spell of dry days, you impacted the harvest weeks and weeks and weeks later.
Yeah.
And you couldn't. That wasn't resolvable. It wasn't like in your Gantt chart, which you could say, well, we've got to catch up this bit because you were done for then.
Yeah, done for.
Yeah. If you didn't do it on the nose.
So they resisted it a certain amount, or some of them. And what happened then? Did you get it to happen? Did it work?
It went. Yeah. How many years of loss? They have many years of loss as they built this, and they've done great things to the soil. So it wasn't like financially it wasn't the only target for this farm.
Yeah.
So they initially, years ago when they started, they had a drought problem, and as they'd increased the soil, the organic content of the soil, they found the organic part of the farm wasn't suffering from the drought anymore because it was holding much more water. So all these things were good, but they'd lost money. And the second year after we did our project, they made money, and they've been making money since.
And is that because they've got fewer people there, or is it because they're producing more?
Initially, really, I'd say it was exactly the same as our business, and that is there was a lot less double handling of everything. So if a piece of equipment needed repairing, they didn't go and talk to somebody who then talked to the farmer, who then ordered it, who'd get it in and then give it. They'd say, well, I've got a budget associated with my area, and when a sprinkler breaks in the greenhouse, I'll go and order another one. And their cost didn't go out of hand, which is something that farmers worried about, that people would spend money all over the place. So it was back down to 100 improvements, and people doing things in that moment when the window of opportunity was there, and not storing up problems for later because they needed to have instruction for something, and they thought the broccoli needed watering, but nobody told them to. And anyway, the Bowser wasn't working properly.
So it's a higher turnover per employee again.
Yeah.
Significantly higher.
And less burden for the farmer, who was really
less stress for the farmer.
He was at his wit's end before, and 2 years in is the first holiday he'd had for years. He was able to go on holiday and not have to.
It's a self-running system.
But it's that common thread, isn't it? It's the devolving of responsibility down, within a framework, within a framework based on free market philosophy.
So nobody was on their own in the farm. They could always bring in their colleagues, or even reach out outside for help. But generally, it was just that feeling of this is my patch, and I've got to make the best of it. And there's people I can draw on for expertise. And if need be, I can even pay somebody to help me.